Hey gang, what am I doing? Well, if you tuned in last week, you know that we started the month of March and we have a different theme every month. And this month it's Get Moving in March. And so the whole theme for the month is going to be about ways that you can increase your health. Last week we talked about walking. Today we're going to talk about some really moving on wild stuff that's happening in the technology world, kind of a blend between technology and biology that's really exciting stuff. And I brought this millimeter ruler. It's one we use every day because I deal in millimeters, not inches. These little bitty dots over here, each one of those is a millimeter. And the significance of that, there's 25 millimeters in an inch, just to kind of give you some perspective on that, because we're going to be talking about millimeters today. There was a movie that came out in 1966 that I remember mainly because Raquel Welch was the female lead in it, and she was the hottest woman I'd ever seen in my life at that point in time, growing up in a small town outside of Houston. But it was a movie where a guy gets a blood clot in his brain, and he's a famous scientist, and they had just, in secret labs in the United States and Russia, they had just learned how to shrink things. And so they took 5 people in a little research submarine, and they shrunk them down to 1 millimeter. And they injected them into this scientist's body with a blood clot. Now, it only was going to last for 1 hour. And they had it all planned out. They were going to run this submarine up into his brain and fix his blood clot with the laser that was, and lasers were ooh-ah stuff back in 1966. So that was the basic plot of the movie. I'm surprised I remember that much because I was mainly focused on Raquel. But anyway, she's like the doctor who is going to dissolve the blood clot. She's his nurse, his surgical assistant. And so made for some good eye candy while they're shooting around through the blood vessels of the guy. And of course they take a wrong turn or something happens and they end up in the heart instead of up through the carotid artery, and the submarine gets damaged, and they finally do make it up to the blood clot, and but a white blood cell attacks the submarine, and there's one of the 5 is a sabotage trying to kill the scientist instead of save his life, and so he gets eaten up by a white blood cell, but the rest of them are floating around out like a spacewalk, but they're in his blood system, and they're about to turn back to normal size, which is going to kill him. And they finally escape. They swim out and they escape through his tear duct and end up out on his face, and then they come back to normal life. So there's the movie in a nutshell. It was called The Fantastic Voyage. It's, if you're sitting home on a rainy day, it's a pretty fun watch. But back then, it was purely science fiction. Nobody thought anything like that. I sat there as a sophomore in high school and figured nothing like this will happen in my lifetime. Au contraire. Speaking of a millimeter, scientists in it was a combination between Tufts University up in Boston and the University of Vermont for some reason. I guess they got a lot of time on their hands during the winter because they're snowed in and can't do much. But the 2 of them collaborated on this, and they actually have created a life form called a xenobot. Now, xeno was from the African frog that they take these embryonic cells from. Bot, because it's basically a robot. But what these guys did is pretty incredible. It was just reported like within the last few months in the Journal of Robotics. But it's not a true robot because they didn't start with some mechanical parts and build a robot like your typical robotic things that you see. They actually took human stem cells from an embryo of one of these frogs. Why they picked frogs, I don't know the answer to that. But they designed a life form on a supercomputer at the University of Vermont. And then these guys at Tufts University took these frog stem cells and actually created a living organism. And if they took it from the heart, what in the embryo they had figured out, this is going to become the heart, which in an embryo it's not anything yet, but they figured out watching these embryos grow which part of the embryo is going to become the heart, and they put those in a petri dish and gave it energy, and this thing started, because it was a heart muscle, or was destined to become a heart muscle, single 1 millimeter organism crawled across the petri dish. So then they took muscle cells, what were going to become muscle cells, and they actually moved faster across the petri dish. Now they've gone further than that in the last few months, and they've realized on the supercomputer they can program these things to do certain tasks. What does that mean for us? If they can inject something into our bodies that's 1 millimeter in size, these things right now last about 10 days. They live about 10 days. If you feed them sugar, figures it would be sugar, and here I'm a dentist talking to you about this, but if they feed them sugar, they last a few days longer. But if they put them in a petri dish with nutrients, they can last up to a couple of months. And that's just in the infancy stages right now of this research. They're figuring that they'll be able to extend their life expectancy. What does it mean for us as human beings? Well, if they get these things down, imagine like the blood clot I was talking about, that they can inject a living organism inside of you that was derived from this frog, or maybe possibly from a human embryo at some point, and it is programmed to go up into your brain like that submarine and dissolve the blood clot. Imagine what could happen if they can program it to kill cancer cells. So the possibilities are endless, and it's the first research that I've read about online that these guys were truly excited, because the supercomputer guy collaborated with these biologists. They're two totally different disciplines, and they figured out how to do this, and now they've even they can program different ones to do different things and put them all in the same petri dish, and they all are attracted to each other. They morph together into a single organism, but they're all still individual 1 millimeter cells. So amazing stuff. I wanted to bring that up because they're marching on with this technology, and I thought it was really, really cool. So you heard about it here first. So that's Xenobots, Xenobots. Look it up, and there's plenty of good reading there. So they're marching on with technology. I'm giving you a health tip for the day, and that is get out and get moving. We talked last week about walking, biking, perfect weather for it right now, 75s, 80s. Get out to the hike and bike trail, walk around the neighborhood, do something to get your blood pressure up. It'll add years to your life, and it'll add life to your years. I'll see you next week for another version of Wisdom Wednesday.